work with the Ministry to the Armed Forces of our Synod, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, in a special program called Operation Barnabas. And it's my privilege today to bring you some information regarding this important program for our congregations. First, I'd like to begin with telling you a little bit about my background. I'm a graduate of Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, Missouri. For the first 9 years of my professional career, I worked in congregations in Maryland and Delaware as pastor. I then went into specialized ministry, having received some additional education in Delaware. And then, after serving Lutheran Council of Tidewater for 12 years, I accepted a call to be president and CEO of Lutheran Services of Georgia, now known as Inspiritus. In that capacity, I oversaw the development and continuation of several programs throughout the state that aided the poor and also other special interests like adoption, foster care, refugee resettlement, after-school programs, and also programs that aided family reunification and so forth. I retired in 2012, and in 2013 accepted this position as program manager of Operation Barnabas. As you can see from this slide, these are some of the major touch points I'd like to address in discussing Operation Barnabas. I'd like to begin with an overview of what Operation Barnabas is and talk a little bit about our motivation and purpose for conducting this important program. I'd then like to move to a discussion about military culture and the effects of service. I'd then like to talk a little bit about Operation Barnabas congregations and chapters and how they might possibly use Operation Barnabas as a means of addressing the concerns and issues that our military members and their families face in their congregation and in the community, and share some of the best practices that are conducted from other congregations around our synod. Then I'd like to leave some time for questions and some further discussion. Next. Let us begin with an Operation Barnabas overview. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod very wisely, in 2007, developed a program called Operation Barnabas to aid and support our military chaplains, both on active duty and in the reserves. Now let me talk a little bit about the evolution of Operation Barnabas as a ministry of our Ministry to the Armed Forces. After 9/11, the United States utilized its reserve forces in a way that had not been seen since World War II. As a result, many of our pastor chaplains, pastors of congregations who were also military chaplains in the reserve forces, were mobilized at to an ever greater degree. Our synod, out of a deep concern for their welfare and out of a concern for pastoral care, developed a program in 2007 which was called Operation Barnabas. Operation Barnabas takes its name from St. Barnabas, who was a witness, a missionary, a healer, and a support companion for Paul. As a matter of fact, he played a very prominent role in the very early stages of the development of the church. Oftentimes, he was even mentioned before Paul as part of the ongoing effort to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to all people. Slide. It's important for us to understand that our motivation for conducting Operation Barnabas within our synod and within our congregations is that it's a faith response to God's great love in Jesus Christ, who gave himself for all people. Slide. Operation Barnabas is a faith response. Jesus continually stresses the importance of caring for one another, bearing one another's burdens. We find, for example, in John 15, Jesus very directly declaring how important it is for us to love one another as he loved us. In Matthew 28, he encourages us to go and make disciples. Operation Barnabas is a program designed to bring God's love to other people, utilizing the relationships we have with them as Christians. In the Gospels, Jesus often redefines our relationships with one another. In Luke, for example, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, when Jesus is challenged by a lawyer who asks the question, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus relates the parable of the Good Samaritan. He ends the parable with asking the lawyer the question, who was neighbor to this man? And the answer was the one who showed mercy. Jesus redefines the nature and character of our relationships with one another. We also find in other areas of the Gospels, Jesus, for example, is hanging on the cross, and his concern is for the welfare of his mother and of his disciples. Again, redefining relationships. He says, "John, this is your mother. Mother, this is your son." And then in Matthew chapter 25, while Jesus is talking about the end times, we find Jesus concluding that section by stating, "As you have done it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you have also done it to me." Jesus continually redefines relationships and brings us into a new dimension of caring for one another because of his love for us. In terms of Operation Barnabas, these new relationships affect how we relate or how we understand our relationship with those who are military connected. And that is service members, both active and reserves, veterans, and families, both immediate and extended. And let me talk a little bit about that further. Next slide. When we talk about military-connected people, we're referring not just to service members who are currently serving, either as active duty or in the reserves. We're also talking about spouses of military members. We're talking about perhaps widows and widowers. We're talking about parents and grandparents. We're talking about siblings, friends and neighbors, caregivers of service members or veterans, and even contractors. What I'm saying here is that there's a vast constellation of relationships that are opportunities for ministry in expressing God's love and care through our services and support of a whole host of individuals we may not have thought of before. So the mission of Operation Barnabas is to honor and support all military-connected people, those on active duty, those who are in the reserves, those who are veterans, their spouses, and a whole constellation of people I just mentioned. We try to do this within the context of a congregation, but especially we want to do that within the community. We place special emphasis upon the reserves, realizing that there are often gaps in services in caring for veterans and service members and their families in the reserves. We recognize that there are some 6,000 congregations throughout the United States in various nooks and crannies of our nation that might be able to provide some additional support that our nation is unable to provide.